what you've heard so far is a discussion of the efficacy of a consumer voice within the regulator and a consumer voice outside the regulator. But in the last 5 or so years, we've seen a third model develop, which is a consumer voice located in, but not accountable to, the regulated company. And that has largely developed within the water sector as a result of encouragement by Ofwat. And so our first speaker in this particular module of the agenda is Anna Bradley, who has been chairing what used to be called the Customer Challenge Group and is now, for the moment, called the Advisory Panel at Southern Water throughout its inception 5 years ago. So welcome to Anna, please.
Thanks very much. What a pleasure to be in a room where there are so many familiar faces. It's very, very nice change. Where are we? Here we go. Okay. So I'm really excited about what CCGs are doing and the fact that this practice is spreading elsewhere. So it's great to be able to give you a bit of a feel for what we do and why I think it's important and different. But I want to just start by being really clear that we're not consumer representatives. And I'm saying that because I was speaking in a room maybe last week, maybe the week before, where another major consumer body was, a representative from that body was somewhat taken aback at the idea that we weren't consumer representatives. They thought we were there to give a view about what consumers think, and actually we're not. So CCGs, or customer challenge groups, are there to give a view about the way that consumers or customers are engaged by companies to establish what they want. So it's on the engagement technique, not on the views of customers. And then we're there to give a view on the way in which that research has played through in the business plans that are then presented to Ofwat. So we're there as part of the process, much more than we are there to give a view on behalf of consumers. Consumers need to speak for themselves through the engagement that companies do with them. And also worth just saying that nor are we just about customers, we're also about stakeholders. We ask and answer those same two questions in relation to the broader stakeholder community. That's really important because in water, as in many public utilities, there are huge questions which have already been talked about in terms of long-term interests, particularly in relation to infrastructure build, which are fundamentally about intergenerational equity, and stakeholders are very often the owners of those issues, and bringing those to customers and having conversations with customers about them is a challenge, as I'll come back to later on. So having the stakeholder view is important. So in Zoe's paper, she talks about a great paper, I thought, and really a good reference point for all of us, bringing all of these things together. But she talks about a number of potential limitations of the customer challenge group, or this kind of close to business approach. So I thought I'd just deal with those first of all. And the first of those is independence. And I kind of want to say, and this is a reference to the rest of the conversation, I just think it is so important that all the people in this room stop arguing about who's most independent. Because actually that's an argument amongst ourselves which weakens us instead of making the most of our position in relation to talking with regulators and industry of various different kinds. And the truth is that I don't know anyone who works in consumer advocacy who doesn't behave in an independent fashion. So, and we all set out to do that. So let's just agree, we're all independent. But it's true that people will sometimes say about CCGs that we can't, actually I've gone too far, haven't I? No, I've done 2 pages. Anyway, so I'm going to deal with this first. So we're all independent, but we have to address the fact that we might not appear to be independent. And how do we do that? Well, some common tools, which all of you will be familiar with. Transparency has already been talked about, so that's crucially important to us. We all keep what people talk about as challenge logs to show what we've said and how it's been responded to. We have really importantly board-level relationships with the company, so we've always got a place to go. Although we also have this linkage with the regulator, which gives us authority, which is in extremis, but we could, of course, go to the regulator if we needed to. And increasingly, we have a peer group. So there are several of my colleagues in the room today who are chairs of CCGs, and you can be sure as eggs is eggs, if any of us steps out of line, the others will challenge us about the way that we're behaving or not behaving as independent. So that peer group is really increasingly important. There were also some issues raised about the membership, and I think, again, some ways in which we deal with this. One is to be really, really focused on those two questions I talked about at the beginning, about the role that we have, because that helps to manage the time, because otherwise it could be a very challenging set of demands for members. And it also means we can be quite focused on the kind of expertise we need on those groups, just to answer those two questions. Second thing is that, and this is, I think, true increasingly for CCGs, whereas in the first round of our existence, members weren't paid, actually now many more of them are. And I think this is quite right, because we are contributing to the commercial position of companies that are making profits. That's what they do for their shareholders and investors, and it is right that they pay for the benefit of having a customer challenge group, it seems to me, and that's why I think it's important that they pay their members. But then, of course, what we also do is develop, I'm role very much of a chair, and I'm sure all the chairs in the room would be doing this with their own groups. You spend some time investing in the development of the group and providing the right kind of training and expert input. So the third potential limitation was around access to data and information. And as I think others have said, in a way, actually, the closer you are to someone, the less this is a challenge. Because you should have, the nature of the relationship and the special privilege that you have of working close to someone should mean you have access to lots of data and information, but it does depend on you having the right kind of relationship with them. So this question of trust and confidence and this real sense that you're adding value is something hugely important to ensuring that companies give you what you want. And agenda setting, doing your own agenda setting, not just having what is the company thinks you ought to be talking about, but saying what you want to talk about and helping to shape the papers and demanding certain kinds of data or asking for it is an important way to make sure you have what you need. Of course, some training and expert input helps us to ask for the right things. And actually, a new development, I think, in water, but an important one in this context is benchmarking, because then you can see what you might have missed. And again, the peer group. So having this reference outside of your company really helps you to make sure that you're asking the right questions. So those are the ways in which I think we are dealing with the limitations. So now I'm going to go back to the strengths. What are the strengths of a CCG? Well, we're in addition to national regulation. I suppose I want to reference the time that particularly I was at the Financial Services Authority, where we were trying to encourage companies to treat customers fairly as the national regulator. And I think one of the things I learnt more than anything else is how difficult it is to raise standards, particularly in a competitive environment, as financial services are, by diktat from the centre. And what a lot of that turned into was tick boxes. And one of the ways that I think you can achieve that increase in standards, really good performance, not just an adequate performance, is by allowing for variation and difference, competition where it exists in markets, and working with companies directly. And that proximity to the company allows a very different kind of conversation, a very open and honest one which builds on where they are in the market. So you might focus on different things in different CCGs because of the company's strengths and weaknesses. And it allows for differences in the approach depending on the locality. And it has a cultural impact on the company, which I think is very difficult for a regulator to effect. As I've said before, this linkage with the regulator gives you authority. And I want to just stop on this last point, which is focus. And I think being able to be focused as a customer challenge group is on two questions. Depends on the rest of the ecology of representation and regulation playing their part properly too. So it's understanding that you are playing one role and all these other people around you in a series of concentric circles are doing other things which are completing the whole picture, and together that will deliver the best result for the consumer, but being really clear about your role is helpful. And so finally, what do I think the real challenges that we're facing? If the challenges that Zoe identified are potentially handleable, what are the real challenges we're facing? Well, one is this notion of scope creep. So if you're successful, people want you always to do more, so keep that focus. We've won some of the low-hanging battles, if you like, success makes the task more difficult. I think the better the company gets at this customer and stakeholder thing, the more difficult for us to do something to help them do it better. Thinking and planning long-term, I've talked about. But perhaps one last one. So Alan Lovell talked about the fact that CCGs are local rather than national, and so we think about local issues. And of course that's true, but actually when you are addressing things like major infrastructure investment, you need to be able to think about that regionally and nationally. And there's a question, I think, for all CCGs about how we join up so that we are thinking about those things collectively and not just as a company. Thanks very much.